Good afternoon or good evening, depending on which way you look at it. Um, I saw from the poll that some of you are Anexo shareholders, some of you aren't. So those of you who are shareholders, I hope you'll excuse me if some of this is familiar to you, but I think it's probably a good idea just to run through what we do and why we're good at it. Just to give you the dates on this, we've just released our full year results for 2023. They came out on the 1st of May. Our AGM is on the 18th of June. Obviously, we're not that far off the end of the first half, and I would suggest that the interim results, we like to try and get those out around the end of August. So that will be, barring anything else, our next major announcement. Can we move to the next slide, please, which just gives an overview of what we are. So what we do, we are originally a one-stop shop for the victims of non-fault traffic accidents. And we concentrate on what's called the impecunious client. In other words, people who haven't got any money, they don't have the wherewithal to provide themselves with a replacement vehicle through their own resources. And there are a lot more people like that than you might think. And there's some stuff on that which we'll deal with later. Ultimately, what this means is that if somebody is involved in an accident which is not their fault, for many people, it's not feasible to go to their insurance company, which you or I might think would be the obvious thing to do. And there are three main reasons for that. These people are trying to keep their costs as low as possible to make them road legal, but little more than that. So it means that firstly, they tend not to look at having a no claims bonus, third party fire and theft only. Secondly, they haven't ticked the box for a replacement vehicle. And thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, in order to keep their premiums low, they put their excess as high as they possibly can. So if you're driving a vehicle that's worth £1,500, you have an accident which is going to cost £1,500 to fix, and your excess is £2,000. There's no point in going to your insurance company. So therefore, you're effectively you either can't get anywhere or you're on the bus. This goes back to basically to the common law perception that you should treat your victim as you find him. If you are deprived of something through no fault of your own, then you have the right to be put in the position you would have been had you not been deprived of it. And it's up to the person who did the deprivation to cover the cost of that. That is just the way the common law works. And we have 3 Supreme Court decisions which have upheld that principle. Now, our vehicle fleet includes cars and motorbikes, and we also started doing taxis. The majority of our fleet now is motorcycles, and I'll talk about that in just a sec. Where we get our work from, we have a network of independent introducer garages across England and Wales. We've got about 1,100 of them, 1,150. My chairman, Alan Sellers, calls them Fred in a shed, and I'm sure you're familiar with the kind of garage it is. There's no point in these people going to a main dealer for the reasons which I've just explained. So they go to their guy at the end of the road and say, look, I've had a problem here. Is there anything you can do to fix it? And if they're lucky, and he's one of our introducers, then he'll put us in touch. He'll put them in touch with us. And we will assess the case. We turn away 50% of the work we're offered. But if we feel that there's a valid claim there, which we think will succeed should it go to court, then we will provide them with a replacement vehicle and cover the cost of the repair or keep the vehicle on the road until such time as the at-fault insurance company has paid the value of the written-off car. So we cover both repairable and written-off vehicles. As I say, I mean, we used to be about 80-20 motorbikes to cars. We're probably about 90-10, to be honest, now. And the motorbike or the scooter economy has exploded over the last few years, especially with COVID. Large numbers of delivery riders, fast food and general couriers and so on. I don't know how many of you may go to McDonald's, but if you go to a standard McDonald's, there are usually more riders outside waiting to pick up the order than there are customers actually in the restaurant. So it's a continuing growing market, and it's expanding outside major cities. Deliveroo, about a year and a half ago, said that they were expanding in something like 30 or 35 small towns across the UK because the demand is always there. So that's the credit hire side of things. That's called Edge. And we have a wholly owned subsidiary called Bond Turner, which is our legal services business. And originally their primary function was to recover the costs and compensation from the at-fault motorists insurance company. It's an unpalatable but undeniable fact that insurance companies don't like paying out. That's not their job. They want to hang on to their balance sheet. Therefore, we find quite often that getting a response out of insurance companies is quite difficult. We can do one of two things. We can continue to write them letters saying, no, you really do owe us some money. Please, could you engage with us? Or actually, we can just issue them a writ, and that is exactly what we do. So when we have a claim, and we have maybe an associated personal injury or belongings claim, for instance, if you get knocked off a motorbike, your motorcycle leathers, which probably cost £300, if they're irreparably damaged, then you should be able to buy a new pair of those. And ultimately, we get in touch with the insurance company and say, if you're not going to pay us any attention, then we will see you in court, and we issue court proceedings. And that tends to concentrate their minds wonderfully. Now, that's not the only thing Bond Turner does. We also have a housing disrepair division, which deals with substandard housing. There's a piece of legislation called the Homes Fit for Habitation Act, which says that people who live in rental properties should be free of things like damp, mold, general damage, or general poor condition. There are some statistics which I'll deal with a little bit later on that, but that has proven to be a big growth area for us. We also have a large loss and claims division. You'll be aware of the emissions division, which an agreement was reached with VW, which was our first class action last year. And we have further class actions outstanding. And we also have other large loss and negligence claims in other fields. So Bond Turner has a variety of claims, and it is a full service solicitors and legal service provider. Next slide, please. So just to go back to credit hire and explain the breadth and depth of the impecunious market. These are new stats, actually. The first one comes from the House of Commons Library of April of this year. 11 million adults don't have a credit card. You try hiring a car without a credit card, it's more or less impossible. 16 million adults do not have the reserves to meet an unexpected bill of £300. That's also from the House of Commons. 8 million adults are in need of professional advice on their debts. That's from the Money and Pension Service, February of this year. And 12 million people are on the edge of serious debt problems. These are big numbers, and it proves that actually we are only scraping the surface of what is a huge problematic market of people who do not have the wherewithal to help themselves when something happens which is invidious to their well-being. The gig economy is 7.2 million gig workers, of whom 3.7 million are involved in driving. That's forecast to grow 7% per annum. So this is not a market that's going to shrink anytime soon. It's important to note that we have a very effective screening and in-house process. The business was founded in 1996, so we've been doing it for the best part of 30 years, and we're pretty good at it. So where a case, where litigation commences, we have less than a 2% failure rate. So we settle successfully in 98% of those cases. And in those 2% that go to court, we also win 98% of those. So we very, very rarely lose a case. And that's really a function of the efficiency of our screening process. And as I say, we turn away about half the work that we're offered. And the vast majority of cases settle before court appearance. Ultimately, when the at-fault defendant really doesn't have a case, there's no point in going to court. They will spin it out for a variety of reasons. But by and large, they will get in touch and they will settle before they go to court, which suits both sides. Next slide, please. So I've talked earlier about housing disrepair. This is a big market for us potentially. It's a good market. There's a good return on capital, and housing disrepair revenues were up by over 36% in 2023. I mean, some of the pictures that we get sent are really horrific. At the moment, we're doing purely social housing. We're not doing private landlords at the moment, but there are I think 4 million social housing tenants, 4.4 million in private rental. So once again, the market is potentially huge. Emissions litigation, I'm sure you're aware of this. Just to recap very briefly, this was an allegation that motor manufacturers were using a cheat device to alter the pollution stats which were coming out in testing. And the first case in this country was VW, and an agreement was reached with them in June 2023. Net of everything, that created a net cash gain for us of 7.2 million. That's 7.2 million, which didn't exist before the agreement. So we were happy with that. We have an ongoing action against Mercedes with 12,000 confirmed claims, and there are other actions against other manufacturers, Vauxhall, BMW, Mini, Peugeot, Citroen, Renault, Nissan. We've got about 23,000 confirmed claims now there. So we're looking at 34 to 35,000 outstanding at the moment. There is litigation progressing at the moment. There is another hearing later on this year. There is a trial set for 2025, but the timetable remains to be seen overall. But we continue to litigate in that area. All the costs of acquisition of cases and legal costs of these cases are expensed as incurred, and it's important to bear that in mind. That in the VW case, we probably invested about 5 million in acquiring cases, but that is not reflected in the 7.2 million of pure cash. Next slide. So the growth potential here is as I say, huge. Over 30 million cars, 1.36 million motorcycles, and that's going up all the time in terms of motorbikes. Personal injury stats, difficult to be absolutely clear about personal injury stats because a lot of people don't report them to the police, but in 2022, there were 136,000 reported to the police. The MOJ estimates that 700,000 road accidents in total and 300,000 credit hire accidents. That's from a CMA review back in 2014. So we have, if we put, let's say, 12,000 vehicles on the road, that's a very, very small market share. Legal services, 24 million homes in England and Wales. I mentioned earlier, 4.4 million in private rental, 4 million in social housing, and 1.5 roughly million rental homes fail to meet the Decent Homes standard, which is tied up with the Homes Fit for Habitation Act of 2019. 750,000 homes with damp and mold, and as I say, we'll show you the photographs if you wish, but it's astounding that people live in conditions like that, and it's an ongoing issue that it's very difficult for some of these housing providers to know exactly the condition that their estate is in. Quite often these estates change hands in quite large numbers, and nobody ever seems to get around to doing a proper survey and a proper overlook at what sort of condition they're in. So things do fall through the cracks, and that's where we're there to help the tenants. Large loss and negligence, emissions, as you know, is a global issue. We also do specialist actions for clinical and/or professional negligence. Our first major win was a thing called Aston Hall in 2019. That was a psychiatric hospital in the West Midlands with some horrific cases of abuse, and we were delighted to be successful for, I think, the 85 claimants who we acted for there. We are involved in the Thirlwall inquiry, which is around the Lucy Letby case, which doubtless you've seen in all the papers. And we are involved in a negligence action against one of the NHS trusts on behalf of an organisation called Doctors Against COVID. So these are big, high-profile cases, and we believe that we're going to be doing a lot more of these. I think also the thing that we should stress is that we do have a commitment to social justice. These things are very important to us. We are helping people who otherwise would not be able to work because they can't get to work, and we're helping people who've been living in really horrific conditions, which you may have seen in the press recently as well. So, we believe we are providing a useful service as well as operating a profitable business. Next slide, please. So financial highlights for 23, you'll see that some gratifying pluses on the right-hand side. Profit before tax, broadly flat. That will be explained in the KPIs in the next slide, but we'll just stick with this one for the time being. And debt was being paid down. We've gone down, a short 4 million on the year. We are conscious of the fact that we would like to continue to reduce debt, and that is part of the strategy going forward. We've always paid a dividend. We paid £0.015 for the year, which is unchanged on the year before. And you'll see that our profit margin was greatly improved for the year, up 21% to 26.6% overall. So we were happy with those numbers. We've got some KPIs on the next slide, please. So these give you an idea, and really, in terms of credit hire, it was a year of two halves. In the first half, we were restricting the vehicles on the road relatively severely, and that's reflected obviously in terms of the revenues coming from the credit hire side and the overall revenues within the group. So in the first half of the year, we were looking at maybe as low as 1,500 vehicles on the road at one particular time. And then as the year wore on, we became more aggressive in putting vehicles back on the road. So we ended the year at roughly 2,400 with an average of 1,900. So if you look at the early part of the year when it was 1,500 or thereabouts, then obviously the second half of the year has been very heavily weighted. Settled about 13% more cases than we did in the previous year, and new cases funded are up 17%. And clearly you'll be aware that those two numbers are completely different. A higher case settled may have been something that was taken on 3 years ago. A new case is funded, maybe settled in another 3 years' time. There's no obvious timeline on those. But as I say, the careful management explains the decline in revenue. And in terms of strategy, we think that probably 2,400 is a good number of vehicles to have for the time being going forward. We always say that we have two levers that we can use. If our cash collections are proving very healthy, so therefore we have a reasonable amount of spare cash, then we can press the button which allows us to put more vehicles on the road, which absorbs capital. On the other hand, if we feel that we need to collect cash, we can take our foot off the pedal, reduce the number of vehicles that get put on the road, and that increases the cash collections, the net cash collections, to go into the hopper. So we are very flexible in what we can do, and that can turn roughly on a sixpence. Legal services, you'll see revenues there also in a very healthy state, and we continue to recruit good quality people into the firm. It's difficult to find specialist solicitors for things like housing disrepair. It's not something that your average solicitor is familiar with. We have set up a thing called the Anexo Academy, and we have a policy now where we take young people out of school or out of college, and we will train them up, and we will get them through their exams and so on, and we will train them in a specific discipline so that they will become very good housing disrepair solicitors or credit hire solicitors or whatever it may be. So that's a good way of making sure that we train people the way we like. And you'll see that the average number of legal staff has gone up slightly, but the number of senior fee earners has gone up quite significantly. The housing disrepair team is now reasonably large, and we have hired a couple of very, very senior and impressive people in terms of large loss cases. So in terms of our staff numbers, we're in a very good position. Next slide, please. So very briefly, really, on current trading, I mean, strong trading within credit hire, as I say, 2,400 vehicles is a reasonable number to have on the road, and I think that's going to continue for the time being. 2,030 was the figure at the end of April, but as I say, that's growing from here. Housing disrepair team continues to expand, and the number of cases will continue to expand, and this is going to become a major part of our business. And the interesting thing about this is that some of these are repeat claims. So you'll reach an agreement with a landlord and say, well, you've got, and normally what happens is the agreement says you've got, let's say 8 weeks, whatever it may be, to get the work done. And very often we get a call from the tenant saying, well, actually, we've seen neither hide nor hair of them. And so the process gets repeated. And occasionally this happens multiple times. And as I say, that is a function of, if I may say so, the inefficiencies of some of the housing providers, that the right hand just simply doesn't know what the left hand is doing. Emissions hearing scheduled for October 2024, and as I say, there's a full trial scheduled for October next year. Negotiations are ongoing, and I can't really say any more than that. We have got 3 other pages of numbers, which is P&L, balance sheet, and so on. I don't propose to go through those in any great detail. As things stand, we believe we're in a very strong position. The share price has been very disappointing. I mean, this is not an excuse, but we're not alone in small cap companies for underperforming, as I'm sure you all know to your cost. And it's deeply frustrating. On any valuation, we remain extremely cheap. And from the Stockopedia figures, which I believe were circulated by ShareSalt, you'll see that we're a very strong green in all the areas that matter. So we continue to be keen on reaching out to our retail shareholding. We're probably about 9% retail held at the moment, but that's growing all the time. And certainly I and the rest of the management team are doing a number of presentations just to try and continue to get the story out there. And we have some supportive major shareholders. So, there is a lot of potential here, and we believe that we're nowhere near realizing that potential. We believe that the market simply doesn't understand our valuation, and we're here to try and explain that. So I guess that's largely what I wanted to say. 23 minutes, not bad. So, Paul, would it be a good time to see if there are some questions?
Yes, and as ever, I will have the presenter's treat of asking questions myself, as I normally have quite a few. So we have had one question, and I think everyone will understand where this question is coming from. That insurance premiums have gone through the roof recently. I think most people have probably been shocked at when they've opened their quote for new insurance. Presumably, that's a good thing for you. That's a tailwind for your business, in that people are insuring their cars a bit more thinly, let's say, than before. Is that broadly correct?
I mean, from our business, that's largely irrelevant, in the sense that our client base has always insured their vehicles as cheaply as they possibly can. So actually, an increase in premium is neither here nor there. It's an inconvenience for them, but it's not a particular advantage for us. There's one other point which I'd like to make about that, which is that people occasionally say to us, well, you're one of the reasons why our premiums keep going up, because you keep making money off the insurance companies. I'd like to stress that there was a Competition and Markets Authority review back in 2014, which was really looking at whiplash. And you'll forgive me, I can't remember the exact figures, but the effect of whiplash on insurance premia was really quite severe. And that directly led to the introduction of the Civil Liabilities Act 2022, which basically got rid of the possibility of claiming large amounts for whiplash claims. It also concluded that in terms of credit hire, the effect on insurance premia was absolutely negligible. I mean, I can't remember. I mean, it was single-digit pennies in terms of its effect on it. So we have a clear conscience on that. We're not the ones pushing up insurance premiums, but ultimately, yeah, I guess but the people we feel sorry for are the people, as I say, who all they want is third-party fire and theft as low as possible, so they can get out there and earn some money by delivering whatever it is they're delivering.
Yes, yeah, no, that's understood. We have had another question which relates to the legal side of the business, and it asks, to what degree are you really filling a gap there that, in a different world, in a world of more public funding, perhaps would be filled by legal aid, really?
Well, I mean, legal aid is an entirely, I mean, that has changed out of all recognition, and ultimately, it's legal aid. There are all sorts of things that legal aid covers, but we're looking at vehicles. We're looking at the value of vehicles. We're not.
I think this was probably more on the sort of social housing thing. That these are people effectively don't have any other recourse, do they?
No, they don't have any other recourse, and it's extremely difficult to get legal aid. It's glacial, which is the other thing. I mean, ultimately, these people need it fixed now. There's no point in saying, well, we'll give you legal aid, and when the case comes up in 2 years' time, then you'll have a chance. If you're surrounded by mushrooms in your bathroom, you really need it sorted out now. So I don't really think so. I think there is always an argument that litigation firms such as ourselves concentrate the minds a lot better than a legal aid funded case, which will take a lot longer to come through.
And I guess one sort of obvious question is, to what degree is there, how competitive is this area? And would you say you're one of the leaders, in particular on the bond pierce? Well, on both sides of it, actually, both sides of the business.
We're now the largest housing disrepair solicitor in the country. I couldn't swear to this, but somebody said the other day that we're possibly the largest issuer of writs in England and Wales as well. There isn't a great deal of competition on the credit hire side. There are individual firms in small pockets of the country who do a similar sort of thing, but there's nobody who has the network that we have, our 1,100 odd introducer garages, and actually replicating that would be extremely difficult and time consuming and expensive. So the barriers to entry are really quite high. So they're a bit, the market for us is, we're barely even scraping the surface. The only thing that constrains us is capital.
And then obviously I can understand how the introductory side works with the garages. How do people that have that problems with their social housing find you?
We do advertise on social media. A lot of it is word of mouth, as you can probably imagine. And that goes for both the credit hire side and the housing disrepair side, that if somebody gets their vehicle fixed, then the word goes around like wildfire. And if there's a housing estate, for instance, a social housing estate, and something happens with one of once again, the word spreads. There's also a certain amount of cross-pollination in the sense that, you know, if you are impecunious and you drive a very low-value vehicle doing a fairly low-value job, it's entirely possible that you live in substandard and low-value housing. So we don't have a problem finding cases, and once again, we vet them very carefully. The housing disrepair side of things, it's relatively straightforward in the sense that we send around a surveyor. He's an independent surveyor. Neither side is going to argue with him. And by the time he's written his report, his damp meter has come out and he's taken photographs. It's very difficult to argue against.
And are the defendants in this case, are they almost always, you know, councils as they used to be called? And
well, they're local authorities and social housing associations. We're not really doing anything in private landlords at the moment. That's only because, as things stand, we have enough work to keep our teams very busy. So it is I say, it's social housing and it's housing associations. And as I think I mentioned earlier, one of the issues with housing associations is that blocks of housing changes hands. And I mean, there's anecdotally, there's one not far from where I live, and it changed hands quite recently. And I guess that's probably 100 homes, so it's not huge. And they've written to everybody and said, well, we'll come around and inspect it by the end of 2024. So, you know, you've got what, 7 months left in the year, and people are they still haven't come around and inspected what they bought.
yeah.
So it's, you know, there's a lot of inefficiencies in the system.
No, well, we've seen that in different contexts.
Sure.
Yeah, houses are one of those things that well, property full stop. If you buy a portfolio of hundreds of properties and just decide that you're going to do it on the basis of 2 or 3, then it's you're playing with fire.
Exactly, and these have been neglected over the years, just because they have, you know, people have never made it a priority.
So we've got a couple of questions here which are related actually. So and I think a lot of it is down to sort of cost of capital and the current share price. So one is saying, what do you think of the idea of using buybacks to take advantage of the current low market valuation? Are you considering buybacks or maybe a tender offer? And then, to be fair to you, I'm going to ask you the other one, because I think you might want to cover both of them together, which is that interest expenses have skyrocketed last year, eating quite a big part of the profit. As this is the situation, why don't you prioritise reducing debt instead of increasing dividends or presumably buying back shares? So there's two different sides of the same point.
I mean, those are two very valid questions, and we do get asked them. Share buybacks are always under discussion. I mean, our next board discussion is on June the 18th, and that's one of the things at the top of the agenda. And so we do look at that. We have thus far. This is a capital-intensive business, and it's impossible to grow the credit hire business without absorbing capital. The other two sides of things, the large loss business and emissions and the housing disrepair business, are not quite so capital intensive. With the agreement that we got last year, we obviously used some of that money to pay down the debt, and that would be a priority for us going forward. We're also aware that some of our debt is expensive, and that's partly a function of the rises in SONIA that we've seen over the last 18 months or so. But yes, share buybacks, that's fine. I mean, dividends, we have paid a dividend historically. When we floated, we said we always were going to pay a dividend. We have stuck to that. We have 1 or 2 shareholders who run income funds, and therefore would be precluded from holding our stock if we didn't pay a dividend. But we are certainly looking at, we look at the way how much our debt costs and what we can do in terms of reducing overall debt, and that is the plan. But we remain a growth business. You know, we have a business. We are a business that's got huge opportunities, and we believe it would be an inefficient use of capital not to take advantage of those opportunities when they present themselves.
And the specific use of capital, then, is that about building your fleet of vehicles that you're in position to hire out? Is that the main thing? It's
I mean, there's a little bit of that in the sense that it costs money every time we put a vehicle on the road. If we are paying for repair of a vehicle, we pay for that in full and upfront. So that is something which costs money. We lease our cars. We buy most of our motorcycles 125 cc's and below, with an element of HP. So that ties up some of our capital. But also, obviously, you know, when we're investing in emissions, then there is the cost of case acquisition. That is more than compensated for, was with the VW agreement. But, you know, all of these things, they take capital, and there are lots of other opportunities out there which we've had to pass up because the money hasn't been there. So we're listed on AIM. AIM is a market for growth companies. We are a growth company unashamedly, but we are conscious of the fact that we would like to see our debt down, and that's also what we're working for. So if we can grow the business without absorbing too much cash, that's the sweet spot.
And got a question here about to what degree you compete with companies like Litigation Capital, and I suppose that there are a few litigation funders in the UK at the moment, and it seems that your emissions case in particular seems of a potentially different quantum to some of the other cases that you specialise in. I mean, is that fair? I mean, and to what degree are you fishing in the same ponds as some of those? I imagine Burford are going out after much bigger things in general, but
Yeah.
something like the emissions case, that presumably could be a significant number.
Well, we had 12,000 cases in VW. We've got roughly 35,000 at the moment with other manufacturers. I mean, that is a statistic which suggests something. Also, I mean, in terms of emissions, there are over 1 million vehicles involved. So, for most of these manufacturers, so it's not as if it's a finite market, and there are other people who are involved in it. I think these companies tend to do rather larger value cases. So, Burford, for example, they'll have a handful of really, really large cases, and that has its pluses and its minuses. The thing about our credit hire and housing disrepair business is that we've got probably 21,000 credit hire cases outstanding at any one time. So to be honest, if we lose one of those, it's not the end of the world, because there's another one around the corner. Whereas I think if you were a large litigation firm and you lose one of your large litigation cases, that's potentially quite a hit.
Yes, and presumably it becomes quite a commoditized product when you've got so many similar cases that your lawyers that are working on those cases, they know exactly what to do to.
Yeah, I mean every case is different, but yes, broadly speaking, this is a vehicle. It's been damaged. It wasn't our fault. We have various obviously hoops to jump through, and we do tend to follow the same thing, and either it ends in court, or else it may settle before court, and we have the ability to settle at whatever level we wish, regardless of what the overall claim may be.
That's excellent. Well, we've got through the questions, and I'm sure there will be people that watch this on catch up wishing that they had asked more. But I just wouldn't mind just picking your brains whilst we have you here, because clearly, as you say, your share price has been a little bit disappointing, and you feel that doesn't reflect how well the business has been doing. And I just wondered, to what degree, when you go and meet fund managers, etc., and institutional investors, to what degree do you feel they are being influenced by the level of redemptions they're getting more than anything else? That they're becoming more it's more about managing flows out of their business rather than choosing what they want to buy, in a way. I mean, is that something that you're sensing, or whether that's changing at all?
Oh gosh, I could rant, but I'm not going to. One or two things I would suggest is that obviously redemptions are a big issue for most dedicated small cap fund managers, and we're a difficult business because we're a difficult share because we're relatively illiquid. So you're not going to want to sell us if you have to raise money, because it's going to have an excessive effect on the share price, and it won't actually get you as much money as you want. So broadly speaking, I would suggest that most funds that have had redemptions will have been selling something else, which is easier to liquidate. We did see some anecdotal signs of money coming in at the beginning of the year, but it still seems as though the overall trend is negative. As I say, I could rant for hours on
what's wrong with the market,
on AIM, and the ways to promote a growth market. And I think that's one of the reasons why we value retail shareholders so much, because individual investors have the ability to say, well, I can buy this and I can hold it for the long term, because I haven't got somebody looking over my shoulder and judging my performance over the last quarter. I think that there is a space for more dedicated small cap fund managers. Clearly, that's a space that's, I mean, take out the sort of private wealth managers and so on, but your average mutual fund is not really involved in small caps at the moment, and that's a real problem from my perspective. Where are the young guns who are saying, well, I'm going to make my name as a small cap investor? They don't seem to exist. So We have some very experienced people, and they tend to be fans of ours, and some of them are quite major shareholders. And long may they continue, is my view.
Yeah, well, no, well, that's a sentiment that I've certainly heard from other people, and I think as well because of the regulatory regime, where quite often treating customers equally for wealth managers means treating customers alike in their compliance view. It does mean that you're by no means the only smaller company that people perhaps might want to invest in, but compliance says no.
Well, it's I think
but maybe the Brit ISA will if that comes into effect, maybe that will provide a bit more liquidity into this part of the market. Anything would help.
Yeah, one would hope so. I mean, all that's happening is that your market cap is going up, your market cap restriction is going up. So, I mean, there's one fund, who said, well, actually, from now we're not going to look at anything below 500 million. Well, thanks very much, but that's not very helpful for us. So, one would hope that will change, because, from my perspective, these people are putting themselves out of a job.
Yes, yeah, yeah, no, I'd agree with that, and certainly I think you're one of many people involved in business that is frustrated at how they're not getting recognised by the market. But I had another question through from Bob, who's asking just whether you've got anything to say about your business moat, and if so, what's the main thing that convinces customers to choose you over a potential competitor? And presumably a lot of that goes back to your network of garages, word of mouth, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean that's really it. We don't advertise particularly, because what we don't, Dams is our car business, direct accident. McCams is our motorcycle business, motorcycle accident. Now, we sponsor a bike race team for the British Superbikes, and have done for some years. So they run around the place in McCams leathers. If you asked anybody at Brands Hatch what McCams was, they probably wouldn't be able to tell you, because we're not particularly interested in having Joe Bloggs ring up and say, hello, I've had an accident on my bike. We need to use people to give us the intros, so that we can gauge whether or not they're viable, and whether or not there's something which is sufficiently profitable for us to want to take on. So in terms of the garages, I think that's important. That's our entry point, and the garages love it, because obviously they can get paid a small commission for something which doesn't involve personal injury. They also get paid recovery charges. So they go out and get the vehicle, and they can keep it on the back of the lot for a while, and they get paid for that. And when it's a repair, they get paid in full and on time by us. So they're very happy, and their customer gets a nice car while their car is being fixed, and they get their car back. So they think we're rock stars. So the word of mouth recommendation should not be underestimated. Similarly with housing disrepair, as I say, there are lots of people who will take these things on, and a lot of sort of small high street solicitors, and that's no disrespect to them, but they will take on this case, and quite often they'll ring us up and say, I've got this housing disrepair case and I have no idea what to do with it. Could you take it on? So it's all about expertise as well. And Bond Turner, I think, has a good name. It's got a good reputation. We're one of the more high profile solicitor law firms in the UK now, and I think that's something which is going to grow.
Excellent. Well, that's been very helpful. Well, I enjoyed that, and I found out a lot about your business. So thank you very much for that, and I wish you all success in the future.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you. And if anybody's got any further questions, my details are on the website, and you're more than welcome to send me an email or give me a call. But thank you very much, ShareSoc, for hosting this.
Excellent. Thank you.